In today's video, I'm going to show you how you can calculate RevPAR in Excel using a formula, and I'm also going to show you how you can calculate ADR. So these are two key metrics in the hospitality industry. So RevPAR stands for revenue per available room, whereas ADR is the average daily rate. So I've got a data set here, a sample data set. So it's got 2026 dates, available rooms, projected rooms sold, projected room revenue. And so I'm going to show you how we can calculate the ADR and the RevPAR just using simple Excel formulas, and how you can potentially create this into a chart to track these metrics in your own spreadsheet. So first, let's start with the ADR. And the ADR is a fairly straightforward calculation. So I'm just going to extend my table here. With the ADR, we're just taking the room revenue and dividing it by the number of rooms sold. So I've got this set up in a table, so it's referencing the actual field for rooms revenue, dividing by rooms sold. And so it's going to apply this to all the cells. So one of the convenient things about using a table is you don't have to copy the formulas down. It's automatically going to extend down. Now, if you follow a link for the description for this video, you'll see a post related to this where you can download the practice file to practice along if you want to do that as well. But that's how we calculate ADR. So very straightforward. It just tells us what our average daily rate was based on the room revenue and the number of rooms sold. Now, we can also calculate RevPAR, R-E-V-P-A-R. And so this is a very similar calculation. Now, you can actually calculate a couple of ways. The first is we can just take the room revenue and divide it by the rooms available. So you'll notice that's the main difference between that and the ADR. It's not dividing it by the rooms sold. It's taking into account the rooms that are available. And so, as you can see, this rate is always going to be lower than the ADR unless you have full occupancy, as in this case, when it's 100. So in that case, the denominator would be the same for both of these, and that's why the 130 is the same. Otherwise, the RevPAR is always going to be lower because it's going to factor in the unsold rooms. So another way you can actually calculate this is by multiplying the occupancy rate by the ADR. So if we wanted to calculate the occupancy rate, let's create another field here for the occupancy rate. And what I'm going to do in this case is just take the rooms sold and divide it by the available rooms and convert this into a percentage. So that way we can see what those occupancy rates are. So if I wanted to, instead of calculating the RevPAR by taking the room revenue divided by available rooms, what I can do is take the ADR, multiply it by this occupancy rate, and it's going to give me the same calculation, because really the main difference between the ADR and the RevPAR is that occupancy rate, whereas ADR is only looking at the rooms that were sold. RevPAR is looking at all the available rooms. So it gives you a better indicator of how you're doing in terms of not only the rate, but also the occupancy. So if you wanted to have one metric that captures all of that, that's where you use RevPAR. The downside of that is you're kind of losing a bit of information because you wanted to see the occupancy rate as well as the ADR. Then that's kind of all mushed in together into the RevPAR. So depending on what you want to do, what you want to track, that's how you can do these calculations. But as you can see in an Excel spreadsheet, fairly straightforward process. You just have to focus on which metric and which denominator you're focusing on. The ADR is going to look at rooms sold, RevPAR by rooms available. And that's really the key difference you have to remember. So now that we've got this data, and I've got this filled in all the way for 2026, so these are, let's say, a forecasted data set here. So what you could do at this point is convert this into a pivot table where you can now summarize it. So I'm going to insert, create a pivot table, and just go to a new worksheet. And so it's got my data set in there. And what I can do is pull the dates into the rows section. And you can see it's automatically grouped by months in my case. If it hasn't done that, you can just right click and click on group. And then you'll see the options to group by days and months. In this case, I'm going to uncheck days because I just want to group it by months. Because I already have the date, the individual days, so it makes no sense to regroup it again by days. I'm just going to group it by months. And now what I'm going to pull in is the ADR, and let's say the RevPAR, and let's also throw in the occupancy rate as well. Now, the one thing you'll notice, though, these numbers are completely off because it's defaulting to a sum. We don't want a sum. We want to average. We want to pull the averages. So I'll click on where it says sum of ADR, go to value field settings, and just change this so that instead of a sum, it's summarizing it by an average. So I'm going to do that for ADR there. For the sum of RevPAR, I'll do the same thing, change it to an average, and the same for the occupancy rate. Convert that to an average. And so now this makes a lot more sense because now we can see what the average ADR was for a certain month, what the average RevPAR was, and so on. So now it's a lot easier to analyze this and make sense of, finding any sort of trends in the data. So the next thing I'm going to do at this point is to put this on a chart to help visualize this data. So with my pivot table selected, I'm going to go to the Insert tab and open up the charts, and I'm going to go to Combo, and I'm going to set all the chart types to be line charts. But for the occupancy rate, because its value is so low, these are in percentages. So this is the same as saying 0.79, 0.82, and so on. These are very, very small in relation to the RevPAR and the ADR. So I want to put that on a secondary axis, just so it doesn't look like a flat line at the bottom here. So I'm going to click secondary axis and click on OK. And I'm going to clean this up a little bit. I'm going to get rid of the field buttons by clicking here. And from the Design tab, I'm going to move the legend by clicking Add Chart Element, set the legend to being at the top. And what I'm also going to do now is adjust the axis here because I don't like this occupancy rate overlapping with this RevPAR line. So I want to make it firmly below right here. And one way I can do that is by modifying this axis. So this is the axis that this is the secondary axis that relates to that occupancy rate. So with that selected, I can just select right click, format axis to get the right place. And now I can adjust the bounds, so the maximum and minimum. So if I change this, let's say I make the maximum 1, right? We can see that that's shrunken down. It goes from 1 to 0, but I don't want to go all the way down to 0. Let's say 0.7, right? So now we got it where it's firmly below there. It's not going to overlap with this just because the ranges and the axis are different. So that's how we can play around with the chart to sort of merge these two onto one area where we know they're not going to overlap based on their axis ranges. And although it can look a little bit confusing right now, one thing I like to do in this case is to actually get rid of the axis. And I don't want to delete that because that's going to affect my chart. Instead, I'm going to go to the Home tab and just set the font to white, just to make it invisible, essentially. And now at this stage, obviously I don't have the data points, which I'm missing, but what I can do is add data labels. So I'm going to go through each line, right click, add data labels, and I'm going to format the data labels to have the data show above the different data points. What I can also do to make this a little bit cleaner is right click and select a label shape. So let's say this rounded rectangle. And I'm going to shrink this down in size. There we go. Size 7. So now we can neatly see what those values are for each one of those data points. I'll do the same thing for this orange one here. Add data labels, format them so that they are above. And I like those label shapes because it makes it easier in case you do have a background or some lines on your chart and it isn't easy to read. So those shapes can make it easy to see those data labels regardless of what's on your background. Lastly, I'll do it for the occupancy rate. Add data labels, format, above, and then data label shape. So you can pick different ones if you want, but I like those rounded ones, and I just like to make the size fairly consistent, so large enough that you can see the key data points that you have. And so at this point, we've got our chart where we're showing all these things, all our key data points. And at this point, it's just a matter of, whether you wanted to customize the look of these line charts in any way. So let's say I change to a solid line, make it green, dashed line, there we go. And then for the average, for the RevPAR, I could do a similar thing just to make it stand out a little bit differently. And the dash types, there we go, just to make it look a little bit different. And then for the occupancy rate, again, a similar sort of thing where we can use the dashes just to make it look a little bit different and a little bit more interesting than your typical chart. And so just like that, we've got all our key data points for these things. And as we adjust our chart, it fits in all of our information. So we've got the ADR, the RevPAR, so we can see that gap, that visualization. We can also see the occupancy rate. And so we can get all that information through just a single chart. And so by doing the calculations in Excel. It's not very difficult to do that. As you saw, we're just really dividing the right numbers by the right denominators, and then putting that into a pivot table to summarize it, and then potentially into a chart to help visualize it. And that's how you can go from start to finish. And if you want to follow along, download the practice file. Again, it's linked. It's in the link in the description for this video, where you can download and use the same data set and try this yourself. So that's all right for this video. If you did like it, and if you did learn something, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos. Thanks for watching.